Welcome! We are
Eirini Fountedaki and
Chakraverti-Wu. Thanks for joining us. We're the co-editors of the publication. You can see it here. How Does the World Breathe Now? Film as Witness, Archive, and Political Tool. Today we will introduce you a bit to the book, sharing a couple of films that we featured in it, and engaging in a conversation with Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art, co-director Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus, as well as filmmaker, researcher, and art historian Viola Shafik. They were both contributors to the publication, and we're super excited to have them here with us today.
And after the launch that is happening today, the excerpts of the films that we will be showing, as well as some extra films, will be available for viewing on the platform Common Garden. And you will find a link on the Savvy Contemporary website as well as the Facebook event. So stay tuned.
So I'd like to start with the way that we always started the sessions in for the film series, which was by reading the poem that inspired in great part the series. This is Sebuah Dunia Yang Marah, An Angry World, by Rendra, an Indonesian poet. The poem's from 1960. After 2 world wars, the chatter of guns and munitions in the air, how does the world look now? After so many speeches and conferences, the establishment of fine institutions, merely to quarrel through 1,000 slogans and stab each other in the back, how does the world breathe now? Here in this part of the earth, there are wounded faces in the dark night of the spirit. We do not need a map to show where our people are. This is an angry world, full of bright, vicious eyes, cruel, hopeless faces, and trembling hands grasping at empty life, in which homes, men, and rubbish are all one, full of impotent bitterness. World wars and rebellion did not change our weary earth. Murder after murder, hatred after hatred, giving birth to nothing but sin, doubt, and disbelief. Gave birth to nothing except the sacrifice of the powerless, the continually questioning faces, driven into a world of confusion and lies. They are always alone. They grow from sin, they give birth to sin. Our world is always wounded. The poor walk with their hunger. They are like thin, dead sticks. They regret their birth but refuse to die. They are sterile, they produce nothing. They cling to the earth, for that is their mother. The others are their enemies. In our tattered world, the poor beat out their bloody lives, suffering sin unconsciously, unwillingly. God stands among them, he is wounded with them, and the world rejects him. God cries with them, but they do not hear him. God is sad and suffering, buffeted by angry feet, buffeted by bitterness and restless fear. Father, avoiding death is their main problem, not welfare or sin. How can they understand the voice of heaven if they have never heard the voice of life? Father, while the world understands only guns and deceit, stretch out your loving hands, your loving wounded heart, your wounds, Father, your wounds. Only through wounds can the world understand love. God cries and understands. God continually cries and understands. He is always stabbed, always betrayed. This is from Ballads and Blues, Poems, translated, this translation, from Indonesian by Burton Raffel, Harry Aveling, and Derwent May. And it's also in the publication. Yeah, so as you can see, the film series emerged out of a pretty dark moment, but also with, a bit contrary to the poem, a hope for hope and action, and film towards those ends. Hence this idea of film as witness, archive, and political tool, kind of trying to establish different facets or different functions that film can have. Maybe Eirini, you want to say shortly who we dedicated the book to? And
yeah, sure. So this book, we wanted to dedicate it to the memory of Sarah Maldoror, a fearless filmmaker, Pan-Africanist, and fighter. And her film, Sabizanga, was chosen by Barbara Gronau and Maya Fike for the 46th session of the series on the 18th of January 2018. And we will show shortly an excerpt of the film. And we were thinking it's good to like revisit moments of this film, as it was part of the liberation movement, the solidarity of those fighters, and the role of the woman who we'll see in the film, who goes from prison to prison in search of her husband. To win a revolution, women must be included. Without them, one cannot win.
Yeah, and that was just a quote from our interview with Sarah Maldoror, which is also in the book. So yeah, why don't we go over to the excerpt?
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So, yes, as you see, that was a short excerpt of the protagonist of Sambizanga walking through Angola looking for her husband, who's been taken for being a activist or insurgent for Angolan liberation. I don't know if we want to say something briefly about Sambizanga, Eirini?
I mean, I find the sound great.
Yeah.
I really like this particular scene because of the sound. Yeah, but I think, I don't know, speaks for itself. I don't know if you want something to add something about this particular scene.
I think just to say about, not even necessarily about the scene, but about the film, is that it's one of these... I mean, I think it debuted in a biennial in Carthage, or at least won a won an award there, and it's one of those few films that's been shown extensively both on the African continent and in the West. So it's not just been sort of lost in archives in the West, and I think that's pretty important. And when Sarah Maldoror was alive, she was just an incredibly generous woman, basically going to any possible showing of the screening that she could make, or a festival where she wanted a Q&A, they wanted a Q&A, and including accepting our invitation to give an interview. So I guess I just want to mention that, and that when we showed it at Savvy, it was also a very special moment because we were able to show the last existing copy, which is housed at the New York Public Library and is 16 millimeter film. So I think that's also, for anyone who's into restoration or has the power there, I don't know if there's already a process to restore the film, but it's definitely a film that I hope will be soon restored, digitized, and made more readily accessible. But yeah, we'll talk about those issues in our conversation a bit later. Let's move to that space where we can talk about stuff. Mm-hmm. Where is it?
It is here, I think.
Yeah.
Wait, I cannot find you.
Yeah, here, you go up.
Okay, I found
Or here. There we go. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay,
cool.
Nice. Maybe go ahead.
Maybe, Pia, you want to talk a bit about the series? I became part of the project, in its post-production, in the sense that I became part of the team for the book. Yeah. So maybe you want to speak more about the series before we move on to the publication.
For sure. I mean, I think this is a nice image to start talking about the series. So this was, we had asked our graphic designer, Lilia De Bella, to figure out a way that we could sort of express this movement of people coming together, or specifically this act that we had every session of taking the chairs and setting them in place, and just this sort of labor involved in making the series possible. And but to somehow do that with the names of the participants. So here you can see, if you read carefully, sort of Anri Sala, Khalid Kurbe, Kuken Ergun, and a few other, Maria Teresa Alves, a few other names of, just a few of the 52 people who participated over the course of the series. More than 52, actually, because we had some collaborations. But just to say that this was built over a long time, and actually the series itself emerged out of conversations at Savvy Contemporary in 2016, when reports of violence around the world were growing exponentially. There was the killing of Black bodies in the US, together with racial discrimination and riots, and while in Europe, migrants continue to die crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, sadly, things that continue to happen and have not ceased. At this point, members of Savvy and the artists and friends who visit them were particularly sort of shocked and dismayed by the experience of the murder of Eric Garner, and how when he was killed, his last words were, "I can't breathe." So that, coupled with the fact that around those days Bonaventure was also reading the poem An Angry World, which I read for you at the beginning, this really made him think, this question of how does the world breathe now? And how does the world breathe when you have this moment of, how do you respond to a moment of total of desperation and of exasperation at the violence around you? In the concept for this series, which was his response, and it's also again in the book, he writes with both pain and fury about, quote, the term today in its relativity and endless elasticity, as both the day, week, month, the moment of 1960 when the poem An Angry World was written, and that point in time of today's now, moving basically between those disparate todays. Many burdens of the world have not changed, and Bona turns to art as, quote, witness bearer and a quote, catalyst for reflections on things that touch the nerve of time in their day, or the zeitgeist. He gives examples of films such as Vera Chitilova's, excuse my pronunciation, Daisies, Wang Bing's West of the Tracks, and Osman Sembene's Black Girl. In naming these films from disparate geographies and points in time, Bonaventure wanted both to give space to the myriad of ways that filmmakers question society and push for truth. But also by bringing these examples together, he had the wish that we would learn from one another and also trace a genealogy of political film practices. Often the people who were invited, because basically each week, which is kind of crazy, each week there was an invitee and that person got to choose a film. Often it was something that was very personal to them, that had inspired their own practice or that had been something they saw as a child. And for that reason, it wasn't just like a film lecture or something very dry and historic or formalist, but rather it was a space for eating, because we often had food, drinking, debating. And I remember very fondly even one session, which was with the Autonomous Space Agency, represented by Adnan Yildiz and Hito Steyl, where we ended in dancing to this Kurdish wedding music, just sort of spontaneously. And I think that, as an example, is kind of representative of what the film series was. This sort of moment for people who are really passionate about film to explore what different methods are and what stories have been maybe pushed to the side. Many of the films were more obscure, but we also had sessions, for example, Candice Bright showing Do the Right Thing, or what was his name? Vittorio Calese, I believe, a neuroscientist showing Ex Machina. So even through the more esoteric, specific films, obscure films, or through the more blockbuster films, it was always trying to find what hid below the surface and how we can question our own position in the world through film.
And parts of what you're saying can be found in the conversation you have with Elena and Antonia in the book. So I think, the book is also kind of like an attempt to document what has happened, but also in terms of informal gatherings, conversations that happened before, in the break, or after the film was screened. Yeah, thanks, Pia.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just important to note, before you continue, Eirini, sorry, I forgot to say this. Antonia Alampi and Elena Agudio were the curators of the series, together with Bona, the concept writer, and myself, who started as project coordinator. Yeah.
Yeah, and now we can maybe move to the publication. Maybe we can also move up where we can see the link to the book. Yeah, somewhere here.
There we go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, with this publication, we hope to offer readers different ways to think about film, picking up on some loose threads and unfinished conversations that emerge out of the series. And so the first it's separated in 3 sections. The first section is called Bearing Witness, Old and New Filmic Practices with Political Clout. And in this section, we revisit the work of 3 contributors to the series, directors Sarah Mulderor and Philippos Koutsaftis, and the spotters of the Activist Alliance Unraveling the NSU Complex. Each of these filmmakers were driven by a political commitment, but their works address very different contexts and issues. So then we move on to the second section, which is called Archiving, Preserving and Accessing Film, where we explore the history of Arsenal, Institute for Film and Video Art, from the very personal stories of co-director Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus. And we have also focused on alternative distribution networks in the African continent and beyond, using Sudan Film Factory as a point of departure. And then the final section is called New Relationships, New Practices, towards sustainable and ethical filmmaking, where we depart from film as a form and we see it within its context of production. So one of the pieces is from foundation class students from the class of 2017, who revisit the piece that they made, which was called Trastas, and it was originally presented at the third Berliner Herbstsalon at Maxim Gorki Theater in Berlin. They were advised by the professors Ulf Aminde and Miriam Schickler. I hope I pronounced them correctly. And then another piece of this final section is by Olivier Marbeuf, who enters the question of film production and the role of the curator-producer through the figure of Edouard Glissant as a storyteller. So Olivier revisits the history of Chiasma, an art space that he ran in Paris from 2001 through 2018, as well as Spectre, a production company that he founded and where he continues to work for. Yeah, so this is like a general overview of the book and its sections. And then within those three sections, we have some interludes that somehow give space to different forms of thinking through film, but in a more loose way. For example, we have a contribution by Yasmina, who was really part of the series, and Pia really wanted her to be there in the book as well, because she was the one also cooking many of the time. So we wanted to include a piece where, you know, through food we somehow revisited one of the moments in the series. Or we have, we have some poems as well. What else do we have here as interludes, like in terms of formats? I mean, we have...
Yeah, so we have a poem from Nicola Mazarov and a poem from Lala Lesh. And then in addition to poetry, we also wanted to include some visual material. So we have a interlude from Francisca Pirvos and Siska from their Kino project.
Right.
And we have also a sort of whole section called Oil Files, inspired by a session that Ana Alenzo did. And all of the interludes, as Eirini said, are people who were very involved in the series one way or the other. Lala Lesh was the sort of starting point for that autonomous space agency session that I mentioned before. And the other contributors were all, of the interludes, were all contributors themselves with their sessions. And I mean, one sort of cool thing, I mean, maybe I'm just a sort of archive list nerd, but about the book is that you actually have all the 52 screenings with the invitee, name of the film, director, and the year of the film. So it's kind of cool to reflect also in that way. Cool. We wanted to especially show some of the spots today. Let's move over there. Here we go. And these are, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Citizens Tribunal unraveling the NSU complex, it took place from May 17th through the 21st of 2017 in Cologne, Mülheim. The tribunal was dedicated to the many open questions surrounding the NSU, which is the National Socialist Underground complex, and it aimed at indicting institutional and everyday racism in Germany. Spots are short audiovisual interventions into various facets of the NSU complex, created in the context of this Citizens Tribunal. They throw spotlights on the racist circumstances that make right-wing networks and their crimes possible in the first place. Spots regard aesthetics as political action, and a selection of the spots was also screened at Savvy as part of the 23rd session of the film series on April 26th, 2017. As we said, some of the spots are actually featured in the book, So here you can actually see a page with all of the spots. This is their sort of identifying a feature to sort of show also this idea of the spotlight. So they're featured in the book in this section, bearing witness old and new filming practices with political clout. So I'm going to start this first film called Victims Are No Extras.
Wir wurden gezwungen, ein neues Leben anzufangen. Wir müssen akzeptieren, dass wir ein neues Leben angefangen haben. Nicht mit der Geburt, sondern mit dem Tod unserer Angehörigen anfängt. Das verbindet uns mit dem NSU. Ich bin Ibrahim Arslan, Opfer und Überlebender der rassistischen Brandanschläge von Mölln 1992. Ich bin kein Betroffener der NSU, doch ich bin indirekt betroffen und bin solidarisch mit den NSU-Betroffenen. Und deshalb werde ich die NSU-Betroffenen, soweit ich das kann, im Leben unterstützen. Wir können das Geschehene nicht mehr rückgängig machen,
Viel zu oft haben wir uns auf die Lippen
Brücke über den
gebissen
Fluss vorher, nachher.
und auf die Zunge.
Wir haben uns viel zu oft auf die Lippen
gebissen,
sodass wir nicht das sagen konnten, was wir wollten. Wir haben viel zu oft unsere Fäuste in die Taschen gesteckt, sodass wir nicht das machen konnten, was wir wollten. Nun haben wir die Gelegenheit, in die Öffentlichkeit zu gehen und dies alles anzuklagen. Ich bin dabei, wenn wir zum Tribunal gehen und dies anklagen.
So this is, as I said, one of them. Now let's move. Where's the other one? Here we go. And I really recommend that you also check out their website. You can just, I don't know if I have the URL here, but just Google Spots Tribunal NSU or Tribunal NSU Complex Auflösen, and you can find the full list or find it on YouTube as well. The form of each video is really different and they're really good. Very touching. So that's another one of their Spots films. Again, definitely recommend their website. Check those out. Now we'll go into the sort of main event, our conversation with Viola, Shafik and Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus. Yeah. So welcome everyone. Today we're here with Viola, Shafik and Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus for a conversation about distribution, production of films, and basically creating more sustainable film cultures, especially talking about North-South dynamics. Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus is a co-director of the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art and founding director of Forum Expanded. She is currently interim head of the Forum section of the Berlinale alongside Malena Greger and Birgit Kohler. Viola Shafik is a freelance filmmaker, film curator, and scholar. She authored, among others, Arab cinema, history and cultural identity, and popular Egyptian cinema, gender, class, and nation. She has directed several documentaries, most notably My Name Is Not Ali and Arish, Scent of Revolution. And we are Pia and Eirini, if you want to say hi.
Yeah, and yeah, we're excited to have you all here. Thank you, Viola and Stefanie, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Our pleasure.
Just let me make a little correction. I'm not the interim director of the Forum anymore. That was an interim directorship. It's now Christina Nord who is the director of the Forum.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
No
we have our bio from the book still, but thanks for the correction. And okay, let's jump right into it with actually the questions for Viola. Where Eirini, do you want to ask the first question?
Yeah, sure. Well, Viola, in the book, you bring up the question of sustainability and how many initiatives are either imposed by the global north and then they don't work within the local context, or you talk about initiatives that are locally conceived and operated but have to stop eventually because they are dependent on money from the global north. And we were just wondering to what extent you think this dependency shapes the way filmmakers make films in terms of form and genre, and also how does this dynamic shape the film culture in contexts that you're most familiar with?
Yeah, thank you, Eirini. Thank you, Pia, for your questions and also, of course, for the initiative. And I'm sorry not to appear here because actually I'm not really feeling well. So I'm more or less in bed because I'm sick, but I will try, to focus as much as I can and answer your question, even though, of course, it's a very, very, very big question. You could actually write a book about it. Let me start in a way historically, because there are so many initiatives and there are so many also local attempts. And of course, if we speak about the global south and the global north, there are so many countries involved and so many different regions. So it's really hard here to give a general answer. But I would like to focus, let's say, on the region that I know best. And here we could, for example, pick out the French efforts through the CNC, for example, an initiative that started actually right after the national independence and the struggles for independence in the former colonies, and it was actually an attempt to still have a foot in the door, and they supported the filmmakers from North Africa, but also of course from sub-Saharan Africa, and here in the beginning it was more about assimilation. The filmmakers, as well as the way how films were made, were strongly assimilated. But of course, over the years, things have developed with also different, with new generations and with different approaches. This has changed radically today the CNC still does support, projects from the global south, but the commissions are very, very, very varied, and they look and are very conscious about, and about the issues of race, ethnicity, post-colonialism, all these kind of ideas. So the commissions are usually quite mixed, and so you cannot really speak about an agenda, an assimilating agenda anymore. At the same time, however, this type of support, particularly in France, is very much is conditional. It is conditional upon you having your film post-produced, for example, in France, or having people to make it more clear, to spend some of the money that you receive in France. And this means that, you do not really have all the opportunities to use local stuff, and to that means the local film initiatives or industries are deprived of the possibility of developing their own capacities and their own knowledge further. This is one of the problems. Another, of course, not all the European initiatives are the same. I mean, we have, for example, to cite the World Cinema Fund, there it is not conditional, but rather it is expected that you spend the money at home in your own country. So there are no exceptions. It is not even expected that your film shows in the Berlinale. Some of the European supports have also this kind of conditions that, or also some of the Arab initiatives, they made it conditional. This is also not the case. So there is a huge variety in approaches, as you see, and some are really trying to be very open to new forms and to support, new talents, and also to look for innovative and film languages, and to look for local stories. At the same time, I need to now refer to something that is called indigenous cinema. If we, indigenous cinema has been recently recently received more attention globally, also because some of the indigenous communities, for example, in Latin America, have started to show, to make films, and also to organize their own festivals. That means also to create their own circuits. Because what I see, and this is another opportunity, because if a film is really produced locally for local audiences and with their own local sensitivities, it's a completely different story as then in the case of these kind of supports that I was mentioning earlier, because the CNC and the World Cinema Fund and so on, despite of all their good intentions, what they in the end up to cater to is the art house circuit. And the art house circuit is in a way, let's say, it is not as mainstream oriented, and not as commercial oriented like other circuits, but still it is also business oriented. It's competitive, and it caters to primarily also to the European markets and to the main festivals in the world. And this means you are still kind of, you're channeling this kind of talent and potential into, let's say, into a certain market. It's an alternative market, but it's still a market, and it is a market that is also linked to say to the pockets and to the possibilities of the global north. Even though there are sort of initiatives like in South Africa and so on, who are trying now to build up a support for Africa and African filmmaking, sub-Saharan African filmmaking, but still, so these are, I'm just touching on some of the problems for you to just gain a picture. Now, with regards to the issue of sustainability, what I had mentioned in the book was initiatives like the Documentary Campus initiative, that was Documentary Campus MENA, that program, MENA region program. This was created just right after the Arab uprising, and it supported documentary filmmakers from the Arab world for 3 years, it had different training sessions along for 3 years, but then it had to stop because this was the money which came from the foreign ministry, from the German Foreign Affairs Ministry, stopped. So, and of course, in such a case, you cannot. There is no sustainability possible. So you give, a support for a while and then you withdraw, because sometimes some of the donors don't understand, the dynamics of filmmaking. They do not understand that the film, a documentary, needs sometimes several years in order to get developed and to be later, exposed to an audience. Okay, now you had an is that okay for you, or would you like to jump in with a question, or is there anything you want me to clarify further?
For me, it's quite clear. I just wanted to ask Stefanie if she had any comments or any thoughts, because I think she comes from a different background, and I was wondering if she has any comment to share with us.
No, I mean, I think it all sounds very familiar, and what I'm dealing with, of course, is much more the, at least to a big amount of what I do, the archive side of that. And it's indeed, I think it was very interesting, Viola, what you just described in terms of art house cinema and the interest or the conditions that come with certain fundings, as opposed to indigenous filmmaking, that is, or locally local filmmaking for a local audience. And I think that archives, of course, or maybe specifically our archive, also tells many stories like that. It tells, it gives you stories, provides stories about how the world is connected via film, and what the power relations are, and so I think those narratives in archives. In an archive are super important, actually, in order to, once you understand them and really read them and let them, give them space to breathe, you might think differently about the present and how things should be done maybe in the present.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefanie. I think I jumped over one of the questions that, and so I'm kind of shifting again away the attention from the archive, which is a hugely interesting topic, particularly also in terms of relationship between North and South. And some of the filmmakers of the global South have major problems in kind of in retrieving some of the material that had been previously shot in their regions from archives from the north. And so this the issue of the archives is and many archives are also not, I mean, not like in your case, but many archives are also linked to state initiatives, and there it becomes really difficult, or they are privately owned, and then in that case they remain fully in how do you say that, in fully ingrained in that issue of power relationship between North and South. And so the kind of decolonization of archives is also a big issue in that respect. So, and I think your initiative is very interesting in that respect. I think I still owe an answer to Eirini and Pia with regards to what they wanted me to speak about documentary that I think is really interesting, or maybe shall we put that after Stefanie's further introduction of her project, or shall I just jump into describing one of the films that I consider really as an indigenous film, as an example of how a film can be really be local.
I say feel free to jump in, but maybe Pia, you want to phrase the question, because I think
definitely for our sort of listeners or viewers. So yeah, what our question was because Viola is also a filmmaker, and in the interview in the book spoke about her love of documentary and how she loves listening to people and hearing their stories. I was interested in hearing a bit about some documentaries that really moved you, Viola, and how and that, like you said, have sort of different methods that that, as you said, make, for example, something really indigenous cinema or very situated.
Yeah, well, thank you, Pierre, for the question. Well, one of the films that really struck me, and it's my own filmmaking is maybe more subjective, and it's in a way, related to people that I like or that move me for some reason. But recently I ran into a film which is called Amusu by Nadir Bourmouche, and it's I'm kind of everywhere where I go, I'm kind of speaking about this film. It is a film that was made in Morocco 2 years ago, or it was finished 2 years ago. It screened for the first time in Agadir, and it says, well, it is Nadir Bourmouche, but with the people of Imida, which is a small town in the Atlas. And it's a community that has been fighting for several decades against the presence of a silver mine, which is the largest silver mine in Africa. And it is, of course, also partly owned or fully, I'm not sure, by the royal family. And it extracts the resources, but what is more important, it extracts the water that this place needs for irrigation, and it gives the environment back a lot of toxic substances. So the issue is that the community is very active and also actually very eloquent, in the sense that they have been also using the media in their own ways, but then they run into Nadir, a young filmmaker, who then stayed with them, and he came up with an idea to, first of all, to teach them how to make cinema, I mean, just not how to make cinema, but just to use the facilities. And then they went on to develop the film, their own film altogether. And they did it via a very local and very democratic way of finding their own opinions. Also Meinungsbildung, I don't know how this is called in English, but it's like the so-called agrao, which is an agora. Everybody, children, elders, women, men, meet. And this is how they are organized, their resistance, but also when they have decisions to make for their community, they meet. And this is also what they did to make the film. So they chose who is going to be in the film, what sort of stories do they want to tell, how do they want, even the dialogues they decided upon, the editing they did, decide upon. In the end, they also applied for some little money from the Doha Film Institute, but it was all very transparent and it was spent for the film. The filmmaker, was just a facilitator. And he calls himself also a griot in the African sense. He thinks, I mean, that he gave his, his ideas and his capabilities and knowledge to the communities. He offered them so that they can come up with their own film text, if you want to say so. And it's a very poetic film, actually. It's very visual, and it uses a lot of the cultural items of the local culture in terms of images of poetry, of songs, and so on. And plus, it is, as this is a community, a Berber, so-called Berber community or Amazigh community, it has also this aspect of the really indigenous language and indigenous culture that is played out here, that gets a space where it can really appear. And of course they were hoping to when the film appears, that they can make their own problem more visible. It did not, they came. I mean, it was so heartbreaking to see all these people standing there in Agadir on the stage, the filmmaker with all, with like women, men, like 20 or 25 people from the village who came along also as directors. And and they were saying, well, we don't know if we're hoping that something will change. Some of the young men were postponing their immigration and were waiting maybe to see a result. They want their community to change, and they were putting a lot of hope in the film, and you never know if a film can really fulfill such a hope. But in the end, it was a communal work. And for me, at least as a filmmaker, but also as a researcher, and I wrote about it extensively now in a new publication, is that it is a lot for me to learn about how, you can start collective filmmaking create an alternative to the so-called individualistic artistic film way of filmmaking that we are used to and have learned to also to admire in the Western world. Thank you.
Thank you, Viola.
Thank you. I'm curious actually to hear now from Stefanie, because something about that resonated with my memories of what you've told me about Archive Außer-sich, where it also was people coming together, maybe new alliances formed, and so I'm curious what your response is to that.
Well, yeah, I agree that the idea of collective filmmaking is very important. It's interesting what you just said, Viola, because often filmmaking, as in contradiction to art, is considered something that is done collectively, but actually define collective. I mean, a film team is not necessarily a collective. It's definitely a collective work in terms of it's a work of many people, and that plays an important role. But what you just described, Viola, is of course a different understanding of collectivity. But I do think that filmmaking does that in many ways. It brings people together in a not every single film. There are some films that are really exclusively made by one person, but then they still try to find an audience somewhere. But films are not finished when they are done, when they're made. So then comes the next step, which is the audience, of course, if you have one, if you find one. But then films also travel and find new people and make new connections. And thus I would say, like the way you just described, Viola, how important it is to look at films that are not exclusively made by one person. It was for me a super important step in my biography to find out that I don't want to be the archivist. I don't want to be one person that has the power to decide what should be digitized or restored first. What is the importance of this? I mean, it's 10,000 films, so you have to start somewhere. Where do you start? Who am I to decide that if I'm dealing with, as I say, 10,000 films that were made by even more people and came to us through the work of even more people and have been seen by hundreds, thousands more people. So an archive is, a film archive in particular, is in the first place something that really is based on the very idea of collectivity. And so I thought, if there are so many voices in that archive, and those are films, really our films, as you said before, Viola, from many different countries. It's not like most film archives are state archives, but in our case, this is absolutely not the case. What connects the films, if at all, if there's anything that connects them, then I would maybe call it something that has to do with a history of and power of resistance. So those films came together and came to us also because of a big network of people that have been working at Arsenal or with the Arsenal over decades. And so I thought the only way to enter this archive actually and to make sure that it survives, because analog film dies, is to bring in again another like many people and make those people archivists in a different understanding of an archivist that work with the films or connect with the films in whatever way. So that was actually the first idea for that was already more than 10 years ago, the Living Archive project, where we really actively invited 40 people to work in the archive for 2 years. But not archivists, we're like artists, filmmakers, curators, academics, performers, musicians even. And they did projects based on their own research, and what they found, those films that they needed for their projects, we put our hands on. So we decided to digitize, restore if we could raise the money and stuff. And so that meant that the films then not only had a new life, a new physical life in terms of a restored version of it. They were not just so to say, saved or secured, but they also had a new life because they had a contemporary context as being part of a project in the present. And so this also led to the fact that all those researchers or archivists who worked with us found out a lot of the archive, about the archive, that I personally could never have found out, or me and my colleagues. So it was only through their very subjective approaches that we figured out, for example, that some of the films that were given to us decades ago because of censorship in a country are now the only survivable prints. So they have a different status. If you know you have the only print that exists worldwide, you have a different kind of responsibility. So we needed this knowledge from outside to move on. And then when you start to digitize and restore films from other countries, and many of them from the global south, then of course you get in touch with the people again who made them, or the right holders, or you look for more elements of the source material for the digitization. And so you again get in touch with many other people. And of course, then it's also about the question of the rights. Who owns the rights of a film that is, lying in our archives for decades? What if the filmmaker is not alive anymore? Or what if a film was maybe produced during the times of colonization? Those were some films we worked with from Guinea-Bissau that came through to us via Philippa César. And then while we are working on them, there is a coup d'etat and another coup d'etat. And so the right holders are, it's getting very, very unclear. So those kind of questions have to be part of the archival process very much. And then of course, it's often the case that the institution that puts the money into restoration claims the rights afterwards. And this makes no sense for us in our cases with those films. It's much more about having the opportunity to giving them back. But of course, in digital times, you can give them back and also keep a copy. But what we always do is we give the rights not back because they always had them. So we do the restoration, but most of the time not exclusively in Berlin. We do it in a project. We anyway have to raise money for a project because digitization is expensive, and it's so you have to kind of build a context in which you can raise money, project money for that. So this is already something that we do based on collaboration with the makers of the film, or the sons, daughters, whatever, who's there and has anything to do with the film. And then we say, okay, the rights are with you, but we offer a distribution contract, because Arsenal allows distribution as an institution that has an infrastructure for that and a network for distribution. We have possibilities to do a lot more for the film sometimes. So we offer distribution contracts, and we keep a digital print, and oftentimes, but not always, also the analog source material, because it's not always the case that you need really good storage place with the right temperature and stuff like that. And then we share the end result. Yeah, so it's about sharing, and this is what made me understood that, because then you meet through the people you meet, you also find maybe other films that are not in our own archive, but in the countries we work with, or not only films, but film archives that have not yet been discovered, and then we start projects that are, for example, now two of our next projects are about a private collection that was discovered in Cairo, and another one in Beirut, and so then we the next project then is focusing on films that are not from our archives, but connected with the archive through our activities and networks. And so that's how I understood that our archive is not more than a small part of a much bigger archive that is spread over the world. And so we have to make sure that we share this big archive, and that we join forces and distribute the resources in a way that as many films as possible get accessible to as many people as possible.
Great. I actually liked how you took what Viola said and then opened something else up. I mean, Viola said she brought up this question of accessing the archive from like a local perspective and how local initiatives have access to archives of films. And then now you're talking more about archive in the context of coalitions and building alliances. I wanted to ask you, Stefanie, I mean, I will go back to this dynamic of global North and global South. I mean, it's much more complicated than that, this like duality of as if there are two entities. I know it's way more complicated than that, but I'm just thinking more in the context of, not in Germany, so beyond the German context. Do you think that Arsenal has a certain kind of responsibility, or if not the word responsibility, a role maybe in like not just preserving films that maybe come from the global South, so to say, but to actually help so that networks or initiatives that are not in Germany continue existing, continue operating, so to play a role in the sustainability. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a responsibility, if not a duty. And a big part of our archive is based on the history of the Forum section of the Berlinale, which is now run by Christina Nord. And that was founded in 1971, so some decades ago. And those films, and there were certain times, certain periods of times where there was a specific wording for it. In German, it was like Filmländer entdecken, yeah, to discover film countries. There are other words like world cinema, of course. And so those discoveries, I mean, there were actually often countries that were, I mean, in the 70s, before internet, people were not traveling so much, so people did not know much about Burma. And when that was a bit later, not in the 70s, but when Burma opened, and there was a whole, and very often when there's like a change in society, then there are many films coming out of that. And so Eric and Ulrich Gregor, who founded the forum and were running it for many, many years, they were really good at, they were so networked that they very early on found those new films from places from which people did not know many films yet. And so they invited them, and then they were often those focuses on country, like a focus on a country. And but then they would also provide often a lot more material, not just the film, also context material, like texts about the political situation. There are even maps, the history of the country, everything they thought is of interest to understand the film. And so this those Filmländer, or all the films that were premiered in the forum, I think were a big part of the success of the forum over the years. And the fact that we are still doing it, and that we now have this unbelievable archive, and that the history of the Arsenal is so sustainable, I think, is based on those films, and thus on the people who made them, and that's why I think we absolutely have a responsibility and a duty now as films. I mean, this is the case with film material, as I said earlier, it ages, and so this moment happened about 10 years ago, where it became really clear, if we don't do something now, the films die. So something has to be done. And that's when we shifted the focus of our work very much to archive work. Yeah, and this is where I think we have to then it's not only about giving films back, it's also about helping people in other places to build their own archives, or to facilitate them with film scanners, or do workshops. But it's not just that. It's it's like it's really always based on projects that we do together, But of course, it's often much easier for me to raise money in Germany. And so, and that's something we also talk always about, what that really means. And then I think it's also about connecting people we work with in, for example, Nigeria, with people we work with in Egypt, because, for example, they have now the same scanner model, the film scanner. There are only 3 films. One is in Africa. One is in Cairo. Another one in Khartoum in Sudan, and another one in Jos in Nigeria. And the one in Nigeria and the one in Egypt is the same model, so they can exchange knowledge and experience. So with the projects, we also try to kind of, we help that people from Cairo can travel to Nigeria and vice versa. So it's not everything happening in Berlin, but still, I mean, like Viola said in the beginning, in film production, the money, as I said, always comes from Germany, and this is still, of course, absolutely not in balance, especially when we look at the fact that when we see the fact that there are so many films yet to be discovered that nobody has yet seen, and in so many places, and films in very bad shape. So there is so much to do, and this could rewrite film history, I would say, really. So it's I think it's very, very important to to end this long speech, not only to focus on the films themselves and the materiality of them and the scanner and the knowledge, everything that I just described, but make clear that archive work is a practice. It's a social and political practice that comes with a responsibility that has to go hand in hand with the decolonization of archives, because a lot of the films also from the global south are in archives in the north. So archive work is a practice, that comes with responsibility, definitely.
Great, thanks, Stefanie. I liked how in the book you said that films only live when they are seen. I mean, it speaks a lot to what you say about archives. Archive work is kind of like not just material. Yeah, what you just said.
Yeah, film print is something very. I mean, the first thing that I ever learned about film is because back then I had my first job was to the film traffic, the film shipping, the shipping of the print. So I always needed the weight to find out how to ship it. So I can still, when you show me film print, I still know the weight of it, and that stayed with me. It's a physical object. It has a life. It has a weight. It has a smell. When it smells like vinegar, you have a problem. But it's not the film yet. You only see the film when it's projected on the big screen, and that needs a lot more than just the film print. Yeah. Viola, are you still with us?
I am. I'm listening, but you know, as I had agreed already beforehand, that I would like to just confine my input to the first 10 minutes. So,
okay.
Because I don't have much energy yet.
I see. Sorry.
But thank you for the very interesting talk and the interesting initiative, of course. It's very much appreciated. And I remember some of the films that you saved and screened, and I really, it's very important what you did there.
Thank you. Not me, many other people too.
Something that I wanted to mention is that I feel like archival work also ends up feeling very, not only what you're saying, sort of political, social work, but very personal, at least in my experience, asking for film rights or film copies, it's often come down to a specific person. And I'm thinking of when we are sort of journey to film, to screen Sambizanga came also from specifically Elena Rossi Snook, working at the New York City Public Library, who is there more than a librarian, more than a bureaucrat, because she really goes the extra mile to try and make sure that people can have access to that copy. Because, I mean, like you're saying about Arsenal, because she knows that's the last copy available, the last screening copy available, and that it's important that it's her duty coming from the sort of Western context and just perchance having this copy to also sort of keep I guess circulating it. And I know also from our interview, Stefanie, that the Gregors, for example, as personalities and as specific people, were so fundamental to founding Arsenal, to giving it the ethos that it has. And I just wanted to ask maybe, how do you, being now co-director of Arsenal, how do you sort of transform some of that very specific personal energy into an institution that is sustainable and that can continue to renew itself and change over time?
I think this has again to do with what I talked about earlier with this. I think it's important to acknowledge that an institution is not run by one person. I mean, in our case, it's very little, like it's three, like we are three directors, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is like really everyone else who is contributing and working with that institution. And I think that the subjectivity is I think it's important to understand this as a concept more than something that is related to one or two specific people. And if you allow, for example, if you just have this very simple idea that there is not one archivist, but that the archive only lives through everyone who's working with the archive, and you call them the archivists, then you have many subjectivities. And so you can never, I think an archive is absolutely, depending on, if you describe an archive, it will always be the archive that you see, you Pia, and or you Viola, or like it's everyone who approaches an archive has a specific, I don't know, background, idea, is looking for something specifically and finding something differently than maybe, I don't know, but it resonates with something very personal. And there is nothing, I mean, I'm sure there are archives that are, for example, state archives. They have this idea of completeness. This is something that I heard often from people who work in or research in our archive, and they tell me, your archive is not complete, this and that is missing. And then I say, well, that's interesting, because we never had the idea of completeness. So it's only not complete for this very person. I mean, it could still be a nice addition, this film, and then so I listened to it, of course, but as we don't have a clear concept of this archive, it's more like a practice, that something that completeness does not exist. So it can only be through subjectivity. But then you have to allow to avoid this one subjectivity of one person. You have to, again, to open it up for many subjectivities and many people and perspectives and approaches. And I do think that an archive, that's the risk. Like when you're an institution, of course you have to make sure that you have to pay the stuff, you have to pay the rent, you have to, make sure that the basics are stable. But on the other hand, I think an archive allows cinema, by the way, also when you run a cinema, but also an archive allows or should allow the institution to change every time something is added or maybe also goes. An archive can also archive work can also mean to let something go, or should mean that too. And then the institution changes, or you really, I mean, our way from the Living Archive project in the very beginning, where we were only mostly working with people in Berlin, based in Berlin, and then later we had more and more collaborations with partners, colleagues, friends in other parts of the world, and especially in the global South. That changes your perspective and your institution, and then I think this is the challenge, to let that happen, and to but at the same time, of course, to make sure that the institution can survive and has a future. But I think to let that happen has a lot to do with finding the balance between subjectivity and the requirements of and the needs of an institution as such. And so this has to be renegotiated day by day. And every single project, every single person I work with in here locally or elsewhere leaves something in the institution, and sometimes more, sometimes less. And yeah.
Talking about also creating coalitions within Berlin also, I mean, we're very grateful because the book was possible thanks to Archive Außer Sich, and without your support, it won't have been possible. So we're extremely grateful for that. And yeah, I was thinking that maybe it's time to wrap up, because I know Viola has been staying with us, but I don't want to keep her too much online. But thank you both for being here with us. It was really, really nice to have this exchange.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eirini. It was my pleasure.
And hopefully you'll also have the book in your hands very soon. We will send them to you.
Great.
We're looking forward. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Stefanie.
Have a nice
Bye. Bye, Viola. Get well soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So thank you all for joining us for this event. And we would really like to thank many people, as this publication will not be possible without their help and support and patience. We will first of all like to thank Bonaventure, so Bejeng Dikung, for initiating the project and for always being a source of inspiration and support in the process of editing the book, writing, or postlude as well. We will also like to thank Elena Agudio for her curatorial insights, Archive Außer Sich for the financial support, Antonia Lampi, Anna Jäger, Kelly Krugman, Gwen Mitchell, Abhishek Nilamber for their work and company on The Wild Ride, that was the film series. And a very, very big thanks to Lydia Di Bella, because she was very patient with us on our design ideas, and she did a great job. So we really thank her for her patience and creative design, as well as Chiara Figone for her willingness to take on this project. We would also like to thank all the contributors to the book. And we will also really like to thank Juan and Abby, who have been doing the recording and also provided us with the platform for this book launch. And we would also like to thank Constant Doulard for providing and welcoming us on his platform, Common Garden.
Yes, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining.
Buy the book. Ciao.
Ciao.